pressure, long-term effects, increasing unemployment, unrest, population dependent, public sector income, and right to strike kills LCC's popularity and devastates the legitimacy of the plan, materializes the anti-LCC sentiment, intimates ousting the law. 15, court criminalizes striking, penalizes public workers, court violated self-constitution, source of laws, right must be allowed right to work. 10, come through strikes, violating prevents expression, confronting oppression, restrictions set up women's anger, judges use personality, LCC's villages, popularity, citizens don't perceive any improvement situation, political execution, persist no popularity, latest episode of terrorism, violation of the Constitution's foundation of law, right spreading possible signal of anger, decreased state legitimacy is good, sustained injection of repression, brutal counter-terror, strategies, fuel terror, conflict, escalation will cause civil war, alternative readings in a wrong safer world. 17, CC uses terror to destroy repression, seeking CC laws, coming to massive incarceration, shutting targets, setting citizens, each in war, escalated repression, typically coming to further conflict, terror, attack regimes, behaviors around a civil war will provoke keeping track of progress and long-term residency of their people around 2, internal instability, 1 is suppression of mass incarceration, independently cause Middle Eastern instability, HRF, 17, testimony spreading evidence, ISIS benefits, directing filter prisoners, long history, incubating violence, Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, radicals, and Egyptian justice policy, striking ISIS, striking assimilation, discuss 2015, 2021, across the young prisoners getting an ideology presented as religious, but about violence, taking time was main motivation, revenge against authorities, better shape, revealing the ISIS penal system violence, physical and psychological ISIS offer justice, injure, rather already access to other prisoners, separated prisoners, connected real cases of terror, ISIS huge thousand prisoners, ISIS 4 hours recreation, mobile phones, medical care, family visits, attracted prisoners, joint officers, scared of ISIS privileges, and 2 is Egyptian civil war, causes Israeli safety, kills Israeli safety, causes Middle Eastern instability, devastated relations with the U.S. Digital Force Meeting, country causes times, 13 Egypt civil war, world violence, against joint military exercises, judicial cooperation cannot continue as the risk. Egypt is strategically important neighbor and change the relation where anyone who desires peace, even with the vital stabilizing one a very unstable region, and that goes nuclear still between 423. Iran has the capacity nuclear disasters could unfold easy for a mistake because of nuclear disaster. Israel attacks will lower risk and young needs external enemies. Iran provides these Israel nothing full for the Middle East continues to compulsive mix of leads to conditions desperate ministering set the entire region of the side of another missile marker point and return nuclear weapons in nuclear cause extinction. Edward 17 Saddam Hussein improved models of hundreds of thousands of weapons will be lost temperature drop 12 degrees icy just smoke inhibited photosynthesis causing crop failures famine and ecological disruption effects similar to John Meter responsible for extinction of dinosaurs would be the dinosaurs unlike the exchange state limited the plan the Arab Republic Egypt recognizes an unconditional right of workers to strike at a worker someone who works for a company or organization but does not have a powerful position. Cambridge no date in constitutional amendment is normal means burning. 20 recognition of the right to strike is for the affirmation of the right to the national constitution. The government is cracking down the strikes into worker mobilizations, putting further restrictive rights which violates IHL, MC, international sympathy worker, Egypt face recipients of workers, trials, military courts, exercising freedom of assembly, I think Islam hard labor restrict the government is using discipline and restrict correction of workers, trading is also seeking to further restrict labor rights, restricting the constitution, IHL, authorities must stop punishing people for exercising the rights, disciplinary measures, including paying out to dismiss or use workers in military and factories facing unfair trials, the military courts, authorities interfere with worker unions by hampering their activities. The government proposed amendments that make organization even more difficult, make it virtually impossible to establish or join a union, and strikes or correcting your Egyptian government, set the groundwork, open humanitarian discussions, and increase publicity. Mubarak's usurpation proves JS. 18 Egypt's government military dominant union of political independence and science counter-terrorism, striking intention from cracking the war will be waged in military and siege villages, union led nation, Arabs, working in praise based on public courts, videos of workers defending protest, struck the nation labor movement, asking Mubarak for doesn't strike living conditions are unstable, while the focus on workplace cooperation, requires to manage community, inevitably politicized discussion, labor, removing groundwork for Arab swing unions, remain the most active sector, challenging the unions of the way labor crisis, raise the same issues that convert workers over how to vulnerable groups achieve life with dignity, Egypt's labor to deserve our attention. The framework, the standard is minimizing material violence. Prefer one is pleasure and pain are interesting about it, display bloom, and all 18. Pleasure defined reward reason in particular similar rewarding you pleasure prevents the eating theories are attractive rewards because they enjoy organisms are a result of evolutionary competition rewards increase evolutionary fitness food drinks mates and offspring are rewarding many claim produce modulate pleasure or produce the opposite liking something represent by regions the limbic system difference expressions associated with pleasure system researchers again neural tissue remarkable conscious neural cortex the area of the brain of open human is responsible for production of dopamine plays a role in ability to pursue rewards of years away. Second is active spec states most useful any other session do the more do good 90 focal fish makes from city private make up information that are sorry because of crystal point important spectures when I'm individual average and average that is enough to use utilitarian calculus. Third is focus on large scale catastrophes as good and they away appeals to social cost more rules and securitization play into cognitive bias and thought risk calculus 2020 is living proof rebirth 20 we're in a time of crisis massive global dangers the right response is often clear was lacking our actual policy incorporating forward into scientific knowledge risk uncertainty long-term horizon of course navigating between risk vested interest force all action cognitive biases emotional self-optimal shortcuts how policymakers back to singularly bad predicting catastrophe many are blocks ones to imagine others not uncommon until they stare you in the face because humans don't have time people are power to deliberate rationally they rely on emotions or moral code crisis dimensions the rules are not helpful drivers and policy analysis key to critical skills and role of policy change heard 17 policy analysis teaches politics law implementation social assertion organizational behavior factors critical to outcomes must play critical role the key roles in thinking through ways to address problems or bring policy integration is critical anticipate correct counter arrangements frame analysis for recognizing alternative options from advanced public debate from orientation focus attention and social problems not just expediency policy and now analysts will critical roles the intermediacy ability to understand and interpret within the topic and far deeper level connecting pertinent knowledge and analysis with policy. I'll send this after. Particular approaches key over theories ignore material justice, policy, pragmatism, approaches from theories starting points of injustice, large assuming philosophical critique can be accomplished under critique of capitalism, modernity, practice, not deny the importance of power structure, many study history, see present evidence of the weight of the past practice, approach takes between a particular situation, not a global social pathology, concept, white supremacy, colonialism, ameliorating particular injustice, forces that could say cause and sustain domination, rather than single causal explanation principles are falsified when open version and abstract. Questioning is useless to recreate violence, Brian. But 12 abstract critiquing remediation, belonging to social material, concept level, spirit, abstraction, critiquing the down social formation, joke 4, proposing realistic alternatives, plans, use of phase 1, radical critique, phase 2, question mark, phase 2, social transformation, use seems like a way phase 1 expressing ways that only a page can understand. We don't have distribution, toxic, things of hotels again. Who are these things for? They is a revolutionary from the capitalists, they are directly liberating ideology and undermining never be comfortable to propose the material infrastructure needs to produce. Let me send it. The body's fine.
Yeah, just one.
What?
It's just one card.
Oh, two.
Yeah.
Okay. I sent it. Yeah.
Do you know a nigga when you see one?
What?
Do you know a nigga when you see one?
What does that mean?
Do you know a nigga when you see one?
Are you asking like if blackness is like phenotypical?
I'm asking if you know a nigga when you see one. Okay,
I'm not
I
sure
think
what that's supposed
the
to
inability to answer that question means that I can absolutely ability to answer that question. How does the affirmative do anything for niggas if you don't know a nigga when you see one?
I think, well, I guess one, sure you know what a black person is, but I think that begs the question of what like blackness is.
No, I said a nigga. What does he have to do for niggas if you don't know what a nigga is?
I don't think I'm in a social position to like assert something on that.
Okay, I think that's perfect. Remember that when you make permutation. Next is, what does the linguistic orientation of the affirmative do for black communities?
Sure. In Egypt, LCC is cracking down on any form of sort of dissent.
No, I'm not asking about the advance. I'm asking about the linguistic orientation of the affirmative.
Sure. I think the ways in which we discuss things like policy action or fiat are something that is productive because it allows us to understand how policies work.
How is
in the
that
real world.
accessible
I think,
and exportable to black people who are not in the debate space, in politics, in
right.
the
I think discussions about Egypt specifically are key, given that Egypt is quite literally murdering people who research.
I'm not talking about the content. I'm talking about the form in which you
I think
produce
the
linguistics.
forms in which we talk about the 1AC is like
Okay,
necessarily
you
connected
haven't
to the
said
content
anything.
of the 1AC.
If niggas die from anti-blackness, even if you vote affirmative, then why vote affirmative? Like why vote affirmative to save black life?
The argument, I'm confused with the argument, what you're asking.
Like let's say you vote affirmative, like the affirmative happens, extinction doesn't happen, hooray, non-black people are alive. Well, black people continue to die from anti-blackness. In that sense, what uniquely does the affirmative do? Black people are still gonna die.
I think the 1AC is a question of the sort of ways in which we learn about policy. The argument is that fiat is good for a couple of reasons. One is that it allows us to understand how policy operates in the
What
real
does
world.
fiat do in the real world for black people who are being killed by the police?
Yeah, you can learn about sort of policies that are a good idea. For example, I think there was a law that ended qualified
Okay,
immunity.
we learn
in
about
Colorado.
policies,
That's
but how
probably
does
a
that, what
good
does that
thing.
do for the literal lives that are being taken?
Obviously, like reading the 1AC doesn't stop people from dying in the real
Well,
world.
even like
the
in
learning
a
process.
real practical scenario, extinction doesn't happen, but black people still die. So why should black people care about the affirmative if they're gonna die anyway?
I think asserting that all black people are going to die anyway isn't the argument. Our argument is that, if you're asking about the sort of benefit of discussing the act, our argument is that the discussions around the 1AC are
Alright.
good because they allow for understanding how a right to strike would get work. That is a good idea because
That's fine, your answers lack specificity to blackness, but is the black worker and the non-black worker in the same social location in Egypt?
in Egypt,
Yeah.
I am not sure.
That's damn. Okay. I'll take prep. assumed in case, and I'm submitting that. You got it? Yeah. Okay. Alright, ready to judge this? Not ready? Alright.
Counter Texas federal niggas terrorizing their politics of straining by recognizing your words on time to start some shit. Let's get it a little bit name and claim we are word for fires for the aspect free to learn from the show, not sister from the hood. Dr. G, who's cognizant of what it means to your five deal with the medium to you feel me? Is she forced in the English imperial being exception, building up being a horror and you super reality and black. Get on enclave, starting English, she moves professional script for for gatekeepers fear too much play when the media doesn't mention though. Hell has to get with the media before I get into something. They get into dope analysis, let's get into a little bit of name and Dr. G's activist and show us from the hood link to hermeneutic can't come back, choose goodness over grammar. G was aware of the pain of being told to speak with all takes for preparation, just being able to speak the language of those who hear the affairs English speaking people. G did not pass, we be practice oriented to found by our historic potentially African signification as assumption. They hear the dynamic cultural listen and psychological difference to know what can say like you. Gotta be here for so whether doing massive like folk, be flipping the script, who we be was the gated to colonies and thesis. Africans had their own reality, language, shapes, metaphysics. Nothing about black folks spoken new reality exists in the horror of the middle passion, build the power of the African spirit. So we said they're working alter the world up as a black spirit in the form of action. Africans great. Second off. Black is the bottom and metaphysical nothing any typically liberate black folk the world that does not serve as the generation is world self reproducing and watching the shadows not just roll about and endures special disruption metaphysical roles just value blood structure reducing life myself more anything in the box of metaphysical system structure makes you think object structure rational irrational category country on top of metaphysical unthinkable and the box of instruction of black box provided for research for modernity to being almost antagonist or change it let it change it become also term human if you think we can mess with being lost for human protection of order where we find ourselves back in the whole block administration world structure for whole world black participation in the world and every social existence possible means being box destroyed. You want any action that built into solid legacy of being the box North Africa, the most should be rejected as an apologetic and framing capable of reconciling history and some history. This is specifically trying to contest other intended for liberal Western northern democracy in a place like Egypt. Watching 20 attempting Asian into black with the most world has been apologetic argument that Western race is different is individual critically analyzing and democracy exists in various forms dealing whether the language is tough when the mood is one of the history and internal marches yet the Western democracy has become more than everyone got acknowledged execute another committed and profit by rating by the for having black what they call it, hard race derived reason for democracy and indigenous black people in the north. Arguments for research kind of countries and blacks in the also more contained in the natural safety system. I was able to climatic racial determination, we must acknowledge free modern and blacks in the British state and subsumed by modern blacks for rebuild the African black people in most of the world include upgrade area good. Like a apologetics and Egyptian state to create the blacks and colonialism because they decided to see where the civilized nation of Walker 21 new place in country and also damages history to place in our history of the same in Egypt and administration of Bangladesh and the blacks in the slave city our foundation of history of Africa. Middle Eastern acknowledge ignored definition of racial discourses, this point in the place for the new years of fundamental formation of the Egyptian state and language of slave change, justify the empire. Saving of black people due to the racialization of blacks, policy stability and words along this established negotiation the blacks in Northern Africa. Although there exists kind of discourse, the end of black discourse, there have been some political and social hierarchies to be granted by the national self of this in Egypt from these ideal blacks and subject. They cheated to claim that Egypt was worthy colonized city, but colonized Egypt, state mobilized cities, nation of blacks, they started itself in the mountain, for some basis of the other nations, as well as colonialism, system, racism, and foundation of modern Egypt state. Now, our scholarship is volunteerizing participating in racial all black history, studiation of black and African political actors, Boko, and the argues for nobody about Western scholarship, argues for fixation from the model city, part of the pop, our country to be uploaded by in blacks of Asia, constellation of power, consolidation, state formation, Irish struggles and faces, or racial wise, failure to examine African states, political actors, that can also be objects, for example, the book and analysis of African China, really, just a British China expedition of African national research, however, regarding the studies, but more this more global perspective would come in here again to China, they colonize Irish culture, but including more people in addition to questioning the dominance of Western personality and including women with demands of re-examining what relationships to political security, the architecture skipped the category evidence, so world is never worth preserving so far as predicated and broken into back to the demand for the world, so the OES, but Wilson, putting this back to the biggest central destruction of society, also something to society makes it essential destruction of blackness can be liberated by separate functions still exist in society, society's emergence, schools, actually coalition, social movements, erotic movements were close upon the illogical hackers of by scholars, and social movements diversified from me in the back to this case. Youth of starting point is falling flesh is guided by desires, color, obtaining, suffering, box every liberty, no violent reason to take action because of various systems, box necessary for the world. This is nexus. One aspect of specificity, risk and policy, abortion governments are trying to box and be that their policy based justification, origin, or reason. Your deck youth today relies on the institution of whatever evidence it's bad, destruction, evidence, bonds, and back experience, and also the security detective preserve and back type of back in a social and material bonds, which we will turn a little bit. The hard evidence gives us critical skills to be in the back, gives us critical skills to be in the back. So as far we prescribe the metaphysics and transit policy kind of discussion. Next, it doesn't explain and come at the totality of structure in the back. Cause by the policy you defend the populist evidence materiality instead of material solution or abandoned solution to destruction totality of being about to create inspiration rather fatigue and cruel optimism which creates exhaustion because the things that actually solve bombs but leave black people vulnerable to more violence. Also they can the particularity cannot confront the totality of metaphysical structure. Brian evidence though abstract theories and kind of key to grammar suffering to understanding coherent a form of rationalities. One back to 2 points now abstraction but a reality extinction argument social that always biological the most severe social that's the most severe because responsible for gratuitous fashion violence the black body those the most attentive for also people control hurling social space wider world assisting black lives the biology that probably makes the probability so that's happens now I always feel 100% clean on 6 claim to make are totally improbable and I would not listen to be something with their arrangement there's no right to black life because they can discuss the preserve when the back to the birth side of the world you can only say saying this after manifestation and the black says came back to the came back next sensation that means the implementation the British how there's mass because saying being die socially biology never can prove by cross examination there's no reason to be affirmative when black people are just going to die anyway all that's matter is probably true in the case all is better but the form which the boys say used to say that all that said black lives matter on in the case probably after that resolve all abuse authoritarian just into the after absolute death reverse the crackdown so called there is convinced that zero AC evidence says who rules either post and what their politics or that means there's substantial risk after something or something whereas next on book or evidence laws about firing people that belong to terrorist organizations after that resolve the evidence Egypt will just circumvent call them terrorists instead of saying for what evidence does not say it causes civil war shows that they cannot resolve their evidence associating evidence assumes Netanyahu who is not in power anymore takes out their kind of inherency to JS evidence of unions were sufficient we wouldn't have AICC right now the Amnesty International proves Egypt will never enforce the RTS such repression happens even though their constitution is trying to RTS now next the African simply narratives homogenize African culture not just the African has the with the Western perception problem the larger Western narrative of African probably right the problem is the other major narratives such as content kind of steps in the white state helpless Africans who can't do this to solve their own problem you didn't become a master reference matters and come first one's reversible you've already that's kind of errant anti-black and that's irreversible because you already kind of had your impact on the basis too with norm setting as a judge your kind of role distribution should be held accountable anti-black because that is something that you should not kind of allow us to know for within debate now Also, the little damn proves away just to government tech first black autonomy for nations, they power and infiltration of our through all the Anglo-Egyptian agreement for less order between so they need to reduce control over the Alpha Spark desire to regulate control of the name of water service, land enforcing the convenience leader, Asian homes, the government forcibly displays human villages, the was completely wrong, prudence, structure, functions, excess was completely high politics, and infrastructure between that sense of population, state, and organization, certain population. This is the country that's built of also the community, the violence, destruction, that makes us homeland, the violence, human inadequately compensated citizens for to relocate the infected to report 50,000 each of the participant violent the infrastructure and make it racist for the extinction survival. The strategy straight from the white supremacy handbook Wilson put it into city really know why racism go forward white national ideal, national white genocide, united white nationalist groups.
I can send my friend.
You good?
Yep.
The counterpoint text, or the counterpoint, what's the net benefit?
The net benefit? Yeah, sure. There's a lot of net benefits. One is about the way that linguistic mediums are ways that we can orient ourselves towards practices that actually have like practical, realistic applications that change things. Two is that it's about ways of endurance and ways for black people who like aren't debating, aren't these sort of political discussions to relate to like the affirmative to things that we were doing. And in that nature, two is that, three is that linguistic mediums allow us to rupture forms of metaphysics and rupture the ways that the world is coherent, because it kind of controls the way that we view politics and orients ourselves towards.
Okay, I just like the composition stuff, it competes textually.
It also competes functionally. CX was very clear, and I told everyone to remember the permutation, when you just could not answer the question of what's the orientation of the affirmative do for black communities.
Okay, the case page, what were the sort of like, were there any, I guess, like extemp responses to the event?
Oh boy, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, you want me to go through all of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. One is that the affirmative does not resolve all of Egypt's authoritarianism, which is kind of a solvency deficit because the app doesn't do anything towards like Egypt politics and like relations, absent like the isolated scenario that the affirmative talks about. Two, that there's no evidence that says who rules Egypt like post the plan and what their politics are, which is kind of a question of like what does the affirmative, like what happens after the affirmative. The next is that on the Bukhari evidence, that the law is about firing of people belonging to terrorist organizations, but the affirmative is unable to resolve those impacts. The solvency is not specific to that question. The safer word evidence does not say cause of civil war. This is kind of hypertext and does not actually warrant what you're going to go for in the 1 ER. Scene evidence kind of has a misunderstanding of who is and who isn't in power in Egypt right now, which kind of matters in terms of how you view the relation to politics of Egypt per like workers in the right to strike.
Wait, hold up, explain the silver scene.
It assumes Netanyahu is in power, who is not in power anymore. And I think that a fundamental misunderstanding of who is and isn't in power.
Why does Netanyahu not being in power change anything?
Yeah, because if the evidence is assuming that certain people are in power and that certain reactions and actions will happen.
Right, what evidence have you read that changes anything that goes on?
I don't think I need to read the evidence. I just need to read reasons why the affirmative, like either soft evidence in the affirmative or reasons like why the affirmative is incomplete. And
Right, how does Netanyahu not being in power change the sort of impact scenario?
Yeah, well, I think that the impact scenario assumes this power, and insofar as it assumes this power. If I'm winning that,
Okay, so it
wrong.
doesn't, okay, that's fine. The African instability argument, how is that the 1AC impact?
What do you mean?
African instability, how is that the 1AC impact?
I mean, people only read about African countries in America when there's some form of instability. So.
Right, okay. Warren. Status of the counterpoint index?
What do you want it to be?
What is the status?
What do you want it to be?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, this one.
You said 242?
232.
My bad.
Should be something. Case counterpoint.
Can you start being more specific on case?
Just say the advantage, and then the counter one, and then the crazy. Oh, the dog's already been set.
Alright, this guy, one second.
Alright, I'm good.
Is everyone good?
Mm-hmm.
3,
Yeah.
2.
Egypt to all sides, workers, crackers, objects, resistance movements, means all fails, but anti-state sentiments, impossible materials, registration kills all seasons, popularity, destroys state legitimacy, physical diseases, sustained repression, fuels terrorism, causes civil war, destroys Middle Eastern instability, causes Israel on nuclear war, the advantage of the limelight, the bossy evidence, one's firm selves, it isn't silent, because they happen simultaneously too. When the anti-black racism in Egypt history, the same kind of anti-black violence that the wilderness evidence says there, share heavily from threes of the absolute, 8 corners of evidence, not a criticism of Sasko, but about a history, people at LCC wants the same policies, they criticize the LCC, helps estimate which proves negative to the action force of the discourse of the Muslim war, and the bossy evidence realizes Islamophobia prevents solving issues, like Egypt turns their arguments often on the world about concern, as well as time for the Muslim war using the phrase history policy accurate reporting by reaching complex custom complex Western media reinforces stereotype of united violent Muslim what Islam is presented as a contagion of the phrase the Muslim war doesn't invite use to denigrate the see the Muslim war in general means that the specific problems of the Muslim country couldn't see the Abu Bakr one evidence arbitrarily starts to sit on as black and Egypt proves that blackness doesn't serve for Africa is pretty phenotype which means their thesis can't explain albino black people's relationship to civil society use that only right strike violence form for black people in Egypt to retaliate against anti-black government otherwise the state violent crackdown on the alternative the Abu Bakr 2 evidence y'all literally collapse the Egyptian state as we know it. 2 their evidence doesn't mean the Egyptian state is structurally bad even if it did a bad thing that caused me to pull a line from the evidence. 3 is the last sentence which is only possible versus the link is just an assertion without a warrant independently CC still engaging Judge said now is pre-negative say actually our link not our argument just a link of omission with the firm selves they didn't read the African instability we didn't read African instability our argument is that Middle Eastern instability but specifically in Iraq Israel and Iraq which is assumed from the ocean our group make them pull lines from the one you see the line from the silver chain evidence they say that there were changes they have in cross-sections embarrassing and proves that they are no sort of material impact as to why those changes change our scenario 2 is that they don't change their scenario because Iran still died is still diametrically opposed to Israel means it's still an incentive to first regardless of sort of who's in power of the safer world argument it's power tech one is it's not I'm not going for it major evidence independently proves ancient Lincoln was dropping the one and C because it was dropping the 1 and C for independently proves instability means I don't have to win the civil war in Sri Lanka they said we don't resolve sort of all of the war trainings but they concede that the evidence spills over to the J's evidence we spill over into other facets they specifically concede that a counter-terror is essentially just counter-strike which is what the 1 C resolves of let's say the J's evidence is false but yes to create change and it's good because it's the will of people as a whole which leads to broader movements which justifies permutation to the app then the alternative they say there's no evidence of who rules Africa. We don't have to win who rules Africa. Just said it's but just said that the LCC is bad and the point gets rid of him, which is sufficient to go to further. They say the Corys about people in terror. They think that was answered above the counterplay. 1 from 2 the counterplay. 6 1 is a bad standard for competition, not an opportunity cost. Counterplays that do anything different than the act are an opportunity cost and can't the ask a good idea, which means it doesn't engage you. So from 2 the bid itself the counterplay gets translated. So it links to the net benefit. From 2 the bid function the same MPI. No data as interest versions like working on statutory leadership. There is from 2 the app about itself the net benefit. There just is a presenting language consolidating debating which can endorse along with the app. There's no dissent to our language. Any reason to competitive excludes other types of languages. Violence they establish standards for how people should speak, which is a personal quality points. They don't translate case. It is a 6-minute diss. The other critique here is an overview of the thesis. 1 is the Wilderson only explain anti-black violence is also in the context of the U.S. system of violence that has not been replicated elsewhere indefinitely. Not in Egypt. They have to win all 3 pillars of social death to win the ontology. Natal alienation is incoherent given that Egypt is in Africa to hold the line in any 2 explanation of the critique will inevitably sound like criticism of the U.S. which is opposite. Not the afterwards. Any cool options warrants continue the interlink being false, but conceded proves that it's true before it's the optimism is good allows black civil society for that's thus an evidence framework. Let me look at the concept of the after for research to impact the point assessing model versus the negative compared to the article about the critique of the material trade of the average map represents the way real actors have made choices. People want to various 6 minutes AC up first 1 of shared engagement shows are relevant in case everything should come first 1 of answer years hoping management but after state billions of lives your answer to progress being 100 and else we should go after preserve but continue to understand 2 ensures all of the stopping effects and you should ever in the 1 approximate causing for 1 further repression cause massive instance of anti-black violence refuse to impact I'll answer this sort of extinction like here it's not a form of sort of or erasure but rather sort of question of preserving life in the first place. It controls the interlink to sort of it controls the interlink to social death is biology that's the prerequisite being able to address social death components that only a focus on mature trying to about instances of anti-blackness solve the ontology to be that this is wrong leads to demobilization kills solving turns all doesn't the only 1 African purpose of blackness determines safety civil and just like recognition that we're trying to rights purpose the capital's order new opportunities for black agency to achieve formally information of black society and able to expand black culture driven real progress and fighting oppression political anti-political center of claims as such struggles for liberation with the African diaspora as well as contemporary struggles against colonialism against colonialism.
not ready?
One sec.
Y'all still tripping even though we asked you to stop. We gonna do the opposite no much to survive in the box and watch your friends. The counter protects is these federal nigga. Terrorize you to know that their politics needs some straining by recognizing nigga workers are entitled to start some shit specificity of the motherfucking text matters because we straight need the linguistic barriers posed by the ones you haven't seen in the nigga terrorists, aka the one you see acting my counter calls for doing the opposite endorse your advocacy text of no if the episode point you can write the ballot but vote negative to endorse no linguistic of advocacy text matters and ours is different way of viewing and acting in the world. This competes one is sexual competition and we have explicitly different text of advocacy. The reason why that matters and it's inherently different from the app two is functional competition. Voting affirmative means you pass the plan to call it. Voting negative means that you have forfeit black linguists instead of no white shit, which is functionally different methods. Also, CX further, this is functionally different than the affirmative because the affirmative has no interpretation or explanation of how they kind of are some form of normal. So there's not just textual competition, or it's functional competition, which there's two recharging distance and permutation. Next to normal means read the evidence, nothing. The affirmative clarifies or clarifies normal linguistic meanings of both for the method. Even in the 1 yard, they make permutation, but never engage in formula of normal. Like the 1 and C and 2 and are engaging in. It shows that they're even a permutation is just not genuine. They're never actually engaging in it. Next, any this has to do with the affirmative shows competition. Now, extending the ENC evidence, both of those has to do with the affirmative. One is standard English, which is the medium of their absence, the medium of imperialism. The ratio of black expansion fails to accompany the harsh values of black life, which turns case because your medium is not only counterproductive but actively violent to black communities. Two, that the medium of absence represents professional discourse, the role to maintain power dynamics and hierarchies, which during the case of the conflict they seek to resolve is likely to recreate or sustain due to power dynamics that you read. Constitute three is the gatekeeping. Instead of voting affirmative, there's the medium of gatekeeping determines who's in and who's not, based on who speaks proper enough to turn the affirmative, because you would never be productive for black communities you claim to care about. Gatekeeping this is assumed when you kind of engage in these kind of normative English forms of mediums of linguistics for that the affirmative medium renders black linguistics a pathology and inferior, so you actually push black people out of your politics and moves to do not do shit even if you solve for extinction, which turns these arguments because even when you're accident impacts, you're not doing anything for actually black communities for practicality. Multiple net benefits to doing a pick and reasons to negate, which outweigh the permutation. One is that the medium of linguistics can be where the message is, which means linguistics specifically as absolutely matters because it creates space for avenues of resistant movement building solid cases because they movements to solve the impacts of resisting conflict. This speak up can be forefront to using their linguistic norms too. They create spaces of agency for black folks to control, so focus over practice and preserve black history and culture, which is why African spirit was one of the few things that survived the no passage, which empowers black folks. Outweighs case of practicality because black people who experience consistent segregation need empowerment for endurance on the day to day, but their impacts are more about security in the future. Three is that it's best for the community, creates meaningful community and dynamic of culture and identity to embrace black agency. This outweighs because it's intra-psychological, which controls the way we think and act and how. In some cases, because stronger community means black people can better organize to advance your affirmative force and its life saving. It flips the script of power and this kind of hegemonic expression of resistance also go for liberty to attack like escape and rebellion to speak reality into existence, which outweighs severity and practicality because it has legitimately saved black lives before and if black matters so much than to vote negative to save black lives on the top of the lives affirmative same because voting affirmative neglects black survival strategy. Two, in the clauses terms case one crossed by all three, so this had two is language, same metaphysics, which means we'll concede leaves on the cake if you vote negative because the pink solves, but voting affirmative means the cake impact still happens with terms case because you would never not be aimed about our antagonist. The black folks come all the reason why we outweigh crossed by our severity and practicality. Way two is that their extinction never just well we outweigh probability and time frame because our kind of time frame of being the black is now, extinction is not now, also probability is now, extinction is not now, so we outweigh and what you as a judge should be doing right now with your ballot, which comes necessarily for next to norm city debates about workers like do not interrogate the system. We defend and do not seek knowledge from black and brown communities set the norm that makes the impact should will always prioritize over groups which should not make sense norm that we should understand interrogate electronic objects with the prerequisite to defend about the structure last form of a content we are criticizing the way that they form in which they kind of exist within a basis. It means that even if the content affirmative is a good idea, even if it's good for black people, the form in which you're engaging in the affirmative is something that we are criticizing and are uniquely different. The soft case arguments, slow one is the language takes benefits, which means that how we view the world, so language can be constructed to change how we view workers and a right structure better come out the affects to view the counterproductive lens sufficiently. They give no reason as to why you need to solve 100% of the affirmative as long as they avoid a disadvantage to the affirmative or have a risk of that benefit. You should vote negative means we cut off the entirety of the affirmatives of all their options because we are a pig. We are doing the affirmative, but just do no there's no dissent to why you cannot just vote negative on that too. Clarify out of the one specific reason we saw the absence of net benefit to doing it because we still do the affirmative, so that even if your case of matter you can still resolve to the negative. This is different language beating the permutation. Well. I told you to remember this point in SCX when you make some permutation because I knew this would happen to be the only form of offense you had. You just splits a whole bunch of permutation when it comes to but conceded the fact that in CX there is this kind of no explanation or understanding of what nomen is, so that CX frames the permutation because it's non-genuine, nonsensical. The affirmative doesn't even know what a nigga is or what it means to kind of endorse best linguistic orientation for niggas, so that the permutation will never fail to
line by line, the permutation, ones that noma comes prior to the perm. You can see in the kind of interlinks of what noma is. Just shows out the same as logic. Just vote on the permutation anyway. Two is the brain medium. This had a medium to use to aim to back and uphold the pressive power structure of permutation. This has to be biased in the sense that this has better more than that benefits number, which is the tactic. For the advanced white mediums next to next to every when you're position to give the pick lexical priority, give the pick lexical priority. The permutation to both you. Once you don't know what nigga is or what how to do things for niggas do. Linguistic medium shows you cannot do what the permutation to calculate. One is not just text, it's also functional. Two is that we do negate the affirmative because we have this as that we've isolated into two and now why you should not do the affirmative. The permutation we both solve arguments. No, one is that they kind of initiate of our pressure Olympics about other languages, but you can see that this creates evidence where we can have better debates about different forms of language and different ways to linguistic mediums that can only come to the negatives. Two is that there are does not change the argument. One is that non-unique happens now. Things like Rosa trans things like white people come out and things like bus and shows that this is translation already happens. People in no way is not static. It's forever changing, which why there are newer and older slang the newer and older slang terms the same for generation got mixed and never legible, even if they are capable of staring out changing, it can never be conveyed an illusion, which shows that the translation argument does not turn the arguments of permutation to both sides argument. The permutation we just have 100% the sense of permutation. Permutation is logical. They need to engage in no mode to actually do the permutation. Does not matter. Kids. Representation confers to the higher distinct language for the affirmative. Consider our weighing and backing characters as telling the affirmative first place which the contract they really care about what's the consequences. There one sees the same care and there's the aims to Africa to follow. Yes, it is linked because you talk about Africa's civil war, so that you kind of only paying African negative ways to homage to Africa and erases black voices and experiences.
Case first?
Yeah.
Oh. Could y'all keep it down just a little bit, please? Could y'all keep it down before I start? I think I'm trying to get to that old guy on the panel that's like, get off my lawn and shut up. Like, at 33, my ears ain't the same they used to be.
Egyptians all silence workers character strikes resistant movements means that the counter plan fails, but anti-states enemies impossible in material is right. Strike kills all CC popularity, destroys state legitimacy because the CC sustained repression kills terrorism, causes civil war, destroys Middle East instability, causes Israel and nuclear war. The only sort of argument in the case features is sort of African instability bad argument. They have conceded that our scenario is not African instability bad, but Middle Eastern instability bad. They do not sort of draw the ancient links to why those are synonymous, which means that either meaning that both of them are the exact same thing is probably problematic. Is that a group sort of different cultures, which is probably turns the sort of Rep's argument too, is that it was underwater in the 2.5 half it was after the time where we shouldn't evaluate authorities and we don't erase black voices. The argument wasn't the 1 and C. You should hold the line from the 1 and C to the 2 on the counterplan. Here's how you frame the counterplan. The competition debate was really poor in the 2 and R. The counterplan is plan plus. Hold them to the text of the counterplan. The counterplan text indicates that they defend all just governments, implementing the right to strike. The 1AC only defends Egypt. That is just it means that the counterplan defends more than the affirmative. That you should read the dockets. Read the dockets really clear. That means it justifies permutation to the counterplan independently. They conceded that they are not functional competition. I'll do that to be here. They are not functional competition because functional competition means that the counterplan results in something that is different from the affirmative. The entirety of the sort of there was a line from the 1 and C that literally said that they do the exact same thing as the affirmative, but the only thing that is different is the ways in which they read the counterplan text. That proves that they are solely textual competition. They have conceded that textual competition is bad. I'll do that in a second. That means that they only generate offense from the text of the counterplan, which doesn't mean the text of the counterplan. They have to drop the textual competition is bad. I'll do that. Now, the textual competition is bad. Is a bad standard for competition because it's not an opportunity cost. Counterplans that don't do anything different than the affirmative aren't an opportunity cost. To prove that the app's a good idea, which means that it doesn't negate, which justifies permutation to do the counterplan. The response to it was nonsensical because they said that they do negate because they're very different. This has to that doesn't answer the competition debate. You have conceded that you are just straight up not competitive. It means it doesn't apply. The only sort of other argument is this I guess this late argument. The permutation would shield the link to any of this. Permutation would shield the link to all of this stuff, but we do the counterplan. That means that there only distance permutation do, but it means it doesn't apply. The other arguments have conceded this sort of solvents if the counterplan gets translated because governments wouldn't be able to understand what the counterplan says. It means that they can't act on it. It proves that only our linguistic model is for policy change, which is a good thing because it gets CC out of office. Those that conceded J's evidence proves that only the 1AC leads to sort of material movement change, but material movement change that outweighs in probability because the interlink scenario is dropped in the 2 and R, but also outweighs in magnitude. I'll do the extinction first to make sure the case. Outweighs in magnitude, extinction comes first. It is dropped in the critique phase or across the plane. Here, moral uncertainty means that a risk of their well-being matters. We should err affirmative to save billions of lives. That means that billions of lives. That comes first and higher social deaths. It shows the interlink to being able to resolve social death because because life is a lexical prerequisite. Obviously, being biological alive is a condition to being able to change the structures that are anti-black. The anti-black they've also conceded that cases of 6-minute dissection is a reason as to why our linguistic model justifies a discussion about fiat is good, because it allows for discussions about how material policy change was also dropped from the 1 year. They dropped from the 1 year. Go to affirmative. The competition debate was just dropped in the 2 and R. This should be a pretty easy half battle in the